The United Nations Relief and Works Agency says there are 12 camps housing Palestinian refugees in Syria. Yarmouk had been the largest, with more than 148,000 refugees, but as we mentioned, only 18,000 remain. In all, 560,000 Palestinian refugees had been living in the 12 camps, and 95%, 480,000, are still there, despite Syria's civil war. The war forced 44,000 of them to flee to Lebanon, another 15,000 to Jordan, both countries that were already burdened with other refugees from Syria. Just yesterday, the U.S. pledged more than $57 million to support Palestinian refugees in Syria. Rasha Elass is Al Jazeera's Syria contributor. She joins us from Washington, D.C. Rasha, good to have you with us. What do you make of ISIL striking here in Yarmouk? I know anti-government forces hold some areas near Damascus, but this camp is less than 5 miles from the center of the capital. So how threatened is the Assad regime?
Well, this is a very scary development indeed, but it's important to keep in mind that they haven't breached Damascus proper. They haven't breached the government-controlled center of Damascus, which is pretty well fortified, and chances are they will have a lot of trouble breaching it if they try. However, when it comes to, say, a place like Yarmouk, where there are other rebel groups, they're already under a lot of pressure, and they've been under siege for about 3 years. A lot of them literally go hungry. We're talking about fighters who literally go hungry. And not to mention disease, and not to mention worry for their civilian families who are living among them. They're under pressure both because of the government siege, because of government bombardment, and also because of ISIS. So sometimes you get rebel groups that say, either put their guns down or maybe pledge allegiance to ISIS just because they're tired of the situation. They have, they don't see an end in sight.
Because this camp has mostly been in the hands of Palestinian militias who oppose the government. So what is going on here? Because these are factions that are technically on the same side in the Syrian civil war, fighting with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're seeing this all over Syria, and not just fighting between ISIS and other non-ISIS anti-government factions, but we see, fighting happening between non-ISIS factions. And in this in particular, there's also a presence of Al-Qaeda-affiliated Jabhat al-Nusra in Yarmouk. Very often it's Jabhat al-Nusra actually that fends off the advancement of ISIS. Sometimes ISIS manages to breach this, but at the end of the day, this is about the weakening structure around Damascus, even if Damascus itself has not yet been breached. But it's also about just an absolutely ridiculously worsening humanitarian situation, especially in Yarmouk, but in many parts of Syria.
You've been to Yarmouk, and this is not the kind of UN refugee camp that we're used to seeing with tents and aid workers and aid coming in. This is really more of an isolated ghetto that is getting virtually no help.
Absolutely. I mean, there was a time when Yarmouk was home to a lot of middle-class people, both Palestinian and Syrian, tens of thousands of them. There were schools, there were pharmacists and lawyers and teachers and artists who lived there. But because of the siege, the situation there has deteriorated so badly that sometimes the sewage water mixes with drinking water. There's diseases. It's ongoing, and there's no end in sight.
I want to get a quick final question in. Where do you see things standing in the civil war? Has the coalition bombing had much of an effect on ISIL?
The coalition bombing does have a great effect on ISIL. Perhaps sometimes it's more psychological than anything. But people often ask, who's winning in Syria? And the only clear answer is it's clear who's losing, and that's the Syrian people at this time.